Hello there, and welcome back to the first speaking sessions of ClueCon TGI 2021. We've already had 3 amazing workshops, kicked off with Kamailio, then Open Sips, and then the SignalWire workshop with Luca, brought in for a perfect landing at 2 o'clock Central Time. That was excellent. So now we're bang on 2:30, starting again. And Abby's with us to give us some exciting news about some of the things that are coming up. How are you doing, Abby?
Oh my goodness, I'm doing so well. This is so exciting. Second ClueCon, 2 ClueCons in 1 year, which brings up a good point. Make sure to check out our August ClueCon. It's still happening. Hopefully it will be in person. I miss all of your lovely faces, and Chicago misses us. But no matter what happens, we will be right back here on SignalWire Work if we can't have it in person. So August is happening for sure. So make sure to check that out on our website. Thank you to all of our sponsors, and thank you to everybody who attended the workshops today. I heard they went really well, and thank you all for being here. A couple getting to know you things. We have a SignalWire concierge. So if you need to talk about how you can get in on the SignalWire action, you can stop by the SignalWire concierge room, and one of our team members will be pinged when someone enters the room. So even if there's nobody in the room, they'll be notified and they can come join you and talk about all things SignalWire. So if you're interested in learning more about the platform that we're all on right now, that's the place to go. And make sure to stick around after today's sessions. We're going to be unveiling August Coder Games, and that's going to be my unveiling, so I can promise there's a lot of fun surprises. So make sure you stick around after the last session today, where we'll also be having a networking party. We're going to be playing some games. It's going to be a lot of fun, so make sure to join us for that. There's also going to be giveaways after each session. Giveaways. I have gift cards to give away, so I'm really excited about that. And Brian gave me a genius idea. I think we're going to have a giveaway just for the person whose video was shown the most during our ClueCon. So feel free to keep video muted if you're comfortable with that. But I want to see all of your lovely faces. So if you're interested in winning an Amazon gift card, keep that video unmuted.
That's exciting stuff, Abby.
It is exciting stuff. My last announcement, come chat with Brian and Mike tomorrow, Wednesday, 9 a.m. in the coffee shop. If you have questions about what they're about to talk about right now, they'll be available to chat. And everyone's also going to be available at our networking party tonight. So again, make sure to stick around after the last session. And those are all my announcements. I'm so excited for second ClueCon.
That's great, Abby. Thank you very much for that. And what's amazing is it's a virtual online conference, but with real prizes. We can give people gift codes and they can buy real stuff. Amazing. Top class. Okay, well, Abby, thank you very much. Have you back after the speaking sessions that we've got lined up in this segment. But for now, let's bring in somebody that everybody will recognize instantly. Tony Minessale. Thank you very much for joining us, Tony. Here he is. And what about this? The first time ever for a ClueCon to happen in February.
Yes, there's always something going on in February, but not usually ClueCon. So we felt like we'd do something. We used to have a Super Bowl party in the early years of Pre-Switch, and then we started going to IT Expo a lot, which was not happening right now. So we thought, let's celebrate the new year and hang out and test some more of our functionality and let you guys all meet and hang out. And
it's been great. It's been great so far. I've had 3 good workshops. All of them have gone swimmingly. And Tony, this time, rather than giving like a sort of traditional keynote speech, you decided to go for a bit of a round table.
That's right. I figured that it'd be fun to just hang out with the gang, which I don't get to do a lot, even though we're all part of the same company now. I don't get to see these guys very often because we're all doing different stuff. So I thought it'd be a good kind of interesting moment we could have.
Yeah, very good idea. Because, like you said, it gives you the opportunity to hang out, but it gives us the opportunity to see the 3 of you all in the one place. Maybe hear some thoughts that you have on various subjects, and also to ask questions as well. And so if people in the audience do have any questions brewing, hold on to them, because there will be a Q&A time. But is now the right time to bring the others into the picture, Tony? Or are you going to speak a little bit first?
No, sounds good. Let's bring them in.
Okay.
Greetings.
There we are.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Good to see you, Brian, and good to see you, Michael, along there at the top. I don't know, would you guys like to kick off with some thoughts and then we lead in some questions, or would you like to kick off with questions?
We can have, we could talk a little bit about FreeSwitch, since we're known for, I suppose.
Please do.
A little software project we started in 2005, still alive and kicking today. You know, in the early days, three of us were kind of the crazy people out there trying to build this software platform that was really, everyone kind of thought was impossible. But we persisted at it and spent a lot of time, you know, trying to make it as cool as possible and putting a lot of effort, you know, doing really big gestures and making powerful stuff. And of course, that doesn't always make things stable. But for many years, you know, we had I think there was a whole era of FreeSwitch when people would run right from our master branch. That would be like, if there's something crashed, they'd just get pull or whatever it was back then, SVN up, and recompile and run it again for 6 more months. And then it would crash, and then they'd pull it. And very kind of cowboy and fly by the seat of your pants as we scaled, you know, to several million lines of code. And around the time when I think it was like 3 or 4 years in, where we first started trying to get a little more organized and put things into like actual releases and whatnot. Although those were pretty slow too. There's like 2-year gap between each one because it's a lot of, we never know when to call it quits on like what we're going to get in on a release and stuff. So we got a lot better at that now that we started SignalWire, and we've been putting a lot of effort into that kind of stuff. So probably Mike would be able to describe that, as he's always been kind of our platform member of the trio.
So we've done. We've been working a whole lot lately, off in a branch still, on preparing for Debian 11. I know we've had some people asking about that, and just keeping up with new compilers and tools. And also, I know we talked about this in August. We've done a ton of work on the test tool chain and drone automation for all of our tool chains. So we've been continuing that work, and we're currently in the middle of the project of kind of updating for all the Debian 11 tools and cleaning up the code base so we pass tests. We will be merging in a new set of testing where it runs the unit tests, runs them under leak sanitizer, and checks everything, makes sure that we don't have memory violations and leaks in our unit tests. And we've been finding a ton of issues related to that and with using the newer versions of ScanBuild. So we've been integrating those tools and doing all those fixes, and that, along with starting to support Debian 11, is kind of the current push that we'll be working on through the next release or two. Along those lines, we will be dropping stretch support, or at least not actively supporting it, as we move to Debian 11 support. We'll still have like Debian 10 as our target platform and Debian 11 as our kind of new in the works. Also, a bunch of stuff has been going in on OS X. There was a stack of issues related to that, and Mario's been feeding us stuff, and we've got most of that in now. So we'll make sure to get that cleaned up before the next release as well. But most of the energy has been towards kind of this ongoing stabilization, having a code base that doesn't crash on you, that doesn't have memory issues. Count term. We're really digging into stabilization and verifying that we have a stable product. Kind of in parallel in the SignalWire world, we've built a lot of tooling into our platform that helps us very quickly identify any issues that are happening and get resolution. And that's more of a process thing internally, but we now have resources that regularly look at issues that we have and address them and push patches in. And we've been dedicating more resources to handling things like public pull requests. Those got stalled for a while. We've got some more focus on that now. Along with that, we have been asking for kind of more collaboration on building testing out as we're trying to really have testing be the core of the system. So just most of the work has been towards creating a super stable platform for y'all and us to build solutions on.
Right, and that's all just simple, right? No.
Well, from the outside looking in, it's simple, but there's a lot of things happening on the back end. I don't think a lot of people really see or understand what we're doing. Just there's a lot of moving parts here.
All simple. Most of the moving pieces individually are simple. There's just a ton of them. So while going through and cleaning up the code base for scan build on a new compiler is 85 to 90% simple. I think the last set of issues that we've started going through was about 150 or 200 originally, and we've done somewhere in the half to 2/3 of those. And then one step up on the compiler for the scanner was another 500 issues on top of that. So it's simple, but it's a significant amount of work. Some of them are easy. Some of them, increasingly more and more of them, turn out to be actual issues causing problems that we see in the world. And we've started to see, this issue that we see, in our production or in a customer's production, that turns out we've got scanner things that are directly related to what the issue is. So we're finding and fixing a ton of issues. It's not glamorous, I'll say.
It's not.
But it has been fruitful.
Yeah. The overall stability of FreeSwitch has improved as a result of these efforts. And like Mike said, there are times where you have these things come through, and on first glance, they look easy. Like, we can solve this problem. You open a can of worms. It takes a considerable amount more resources to solve that one thing that we're thinking going to be simple, but it's the nature of what we do.
Well, thank you for those answers there, or those thoughts. If you do have questions, you can pop them into the chat. I wanted to ask a question that's going to put you in sort of looking backwards mode for a bit, because you all have been at this for over 15 years now, and it's not uncommon in situations like that for there to be changes of personnel and lots of different things. But three of you have all been doing this together for a long, long time. What I wanted to ask, and I'd like you to give kind of separate answers and not duplicate, and we can start with Tony, then go to Michael, then go to Brian, and that is just talk about a memory or a milestone that comes to mind over the last 15 years. And I think this is quite fascinating, because I know from talking to Tony that he had a vision, some of which has only just been filled in more recent years, even though you started working on this such a long time ago. So a memory or a milestone over the last 15 years, starting with you, Tony, please.
I would say there's a lot of them in the earlier days, and then they get farther apart the longer we go, because the distance to the next cool thing starts to get kind of stretched out. But I remember the first time that I had a coherent audio stream pouring out, you know, being able to actually like, look, I can hear the sound file playing, you know, like such a small milestone compared to what else we had to do in the big picture. But like that moment was like a pretty big one. And I would say like when we actually created a analog telecom library along the way. That was pretty cool, even though it didn't last long because that kind of stuff started to fade away pretty quickly. But we put effort into driving, say, like Sangoma cards and digital cards because we wanted to be able to play with that stuff, and like generating a dial tone into an actual telephone was pretty cool.
I like that one because I still call it 30 days, 30,000 lines of code.
Yeah, that was 2007, the summer, the month of June. We wrote like an entire what we called Opens app, and then I think Sangoma started playing with it, and they called it something else. And from there, I would say like scalability moments. I hope I don't steal the rest of there. So you only want me to do one, right? So I've already said like 4.
Yeah, let's switch over to Michael now. See what he has to say.
Mike.
What's my favorite? An amusing anecdote was I took a week vacation once, and Tony wrote my conference.
I remember that. That was an ordeal.
I came back and he's like, "Look at this," and that must have been what, 2006.
Mm-hmm.
I went to, I think, North Carolina Arizona, and came back and he's like, "Look at this that I made." Those are always interesting. The stuff that I like tends to be more deep in, long haul, like the video work that we originally did, and then looking back at how massively it's matured over the years. Video is a full video stack is a massive endeavor that we probably didn't quite know what we were getting into, but the benefits have definitely paid off. Yeah, so that and the places we've been working and evolving on that is incredibly technically interesting to me. I love creating great solutions. So those are the interesting ones, and that was just a mere 5 or 6 years worth of work.
Okay, thank you, Michael. What about you, Brian?
Well, I think one of the biggest things I can remember is probably before all of this ever started was I was at the first AstroCon, and by then we had already had a discussion about what we were going to do next. And I remember talking kind of to a group of people there in the lobby at the hotel. I think it was the Sheraton or the Marriott there in Atlanta, kind of where we're going. And I remember everybody going, "Oh, you're crazy. You just can't do all this stuff from scratch." I was like, well, we kind of have to, to get what we want, because what we were wanting to do was like beyond what anything had already been written was designed to do. Now, Asterisk was a great catalyst for what we did. It was ahead of its time. We pushed it beyond its design limits, which was the biggest thing that we ran into. You can only fit a square peg in a round hole so many times before you decide to make another round peg, which is kind of what we did. So the biggest thing I remember is that conversation at the first AstroCon with a group of people about. That's also the first time I ever publicly spoke in front of a large crowd. And if anybody that's watching will remember, I wrote the original ODBC CDR driver in Asterisk, and that was the first thing I ever wrote in C. And from the time of writing anything in C to having something working was 2.5 hours. I'd never written anything in C. I was just like, I'm going in blind. The documentation was horrible. Like all of it was wrong. Like it was trial and error at that point. But that's my biggest memory of how this all started to be. There's a lot before that, you know, when Tony was like, Tony had tried to hire me for, you know, 6 months prior to working with him, and I wouldn't trade any of that for anything in the world because it was an awesome experience. I learned a lot about Asterisk in the time frame before I worked with Tony. I learned a lot of Asterisk working with Tony, and then working with Tony to build FreeSwitch. I consider it an honor to be where we're at right now. I think we've done a lot to change a lot of things in the world, and I jokingly apologize for the car warranty calls. Well, not all of them are our fault, okay? I'm just saying. Just tell them Bobby Table sent you, and they'll know who I am, because that's what I tell people. Like, now I get phone calls for Bobby Tables like 10 times a day. And so I know it's a scammer or a spammer or something. So I really started to have a lot of fun with it. But I do think being involved with FreeSwitch and being able to do what I've done with Anthony and Mike, it's been a great honor. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And we have so much more to do and so much more to accomplish. I think these guys are going to talk about some of those components as well.
I remember another one you might like to tell a story of. The time that we saturated the 100 megabit.
Oh my goodness.
Network.
Okay. So we were we were sitting here trying to load test FreeSwitch. We could only get 1,200 phone calls. And we just like, we've investigated the code, we've investigated everything, and then it dawned on us. That's about the extent you can get on 100 megabits. So we upgraded to gigabit. And you would think we would think about that, right? No. Another magic number shows up. We were at like 13, 14,000 phone calls, and it all fell apart. And I'm thinking to myself, this seems so familiar, but we didn't catch on like right off the bat. We're at gigabit, and like we're 10 times that, and we're at that limit again. So yeah, it was fun.
There just was no such thing as saturating such a circuit.
Right. It was just not called for at that point. Like, people were like, oh my God, you have 12,000 phone calls. Well, you would never want to really actually
Those
do
are kind of fun memories too. Or the time we first connected the T1 line. And we
or that SS7 connection across the coffee shop in Milwaukee. We literally established an SS7 connection in a coffee shop in downtown Milwaukee between a Sangoma solution and a Telco Bridges solution using FreeSwitch to drive it all. And that's a first. I don't know how many people in here have ever said they've been able to establish an SS7 in a coffee shop. We did it.
We also melted an AS5300.
We did that as well. We took out
SP for like a week or something.
We took out a switch at MCI WorldCom as well by mistake one time. We were doing some testing with a what was that? It was an Ascend Max. We had like 28 T1s. We were trying to do a load test, and somehow I screwed up the routing. It was one character off. It was totally my fault. But the next thing we know, he sends the whole DS3 of phone calls out at once to the PSTN, took out their whole switch. All right. They like took it down and said, okay, we're not doing this no more. And then they installed skips on our circuits. So our circuits were randomly failing. Like every other phone call was like randomly failing. And they told us, oh, it's your equipment. I spent a month of sleepless nights trying to troubleshoot this problem because I know it wasn't equipment. Then I spent like $40,000 of the company money to replace all this equipment. It was still doing it. When it's all said and done, those people never wanted to talk to me again. I was not happy, but it was a fun learning experience because I learned some things that telecoms do when they don't want you to actually use the service you're paying for.
Or the current affair moment.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a good one too. I don't know if you guys remember way back when, Michael Jackson had the guilty or innocent thing on a current affair. The company Current Affair bought numbers on our system for call this number if he's guilty, call this number if he's innocent. Didn't tell us anything. Didn't tell us nothing. Our whole system just blew up. Like we were not ready for that onslaught of nationwide phone calls going down at DS3. Like we were doing like 120 times traffic down this DS3.
More specifically, the company selling us the DS3 didn't ever expect us to actually use the whole thing at once, which we were doing because we actually could handle the load from it. And they're like, you're not allowed to use all these channels. It's like, well, we're paying you for them, aren't we? So that was another interesting moment because no one probably lit up a DS3 before with their equipment.
I don't think anybody would have guessed that Michael Jackson and the free switch story was somehow entwined like that.
They wouldn't have known. It's one of those moments in time that like you really stop and think about sometimes. Wow, I was involved in that.
Now, Tony, like you just mentioned, the milestones get further apart as the project matures because you kind of got, you got that phase where you're adding a lot of fun and exciting stuff fairly regularly. But as the project matures, so they get further apart because you've got lots of good stuff in there already, and you're maybe fine tuning some of the stuff you've got rather than adding new things. So that puts us in mind of thinking about where the project is now and where it might go in the future. Is there anything you want to speak about there?
Well, one of the things we started doing were to look at other ways that we can be interesting. And we started this, I think this summer, we announced it for the first time, but it's still in motion. But we added some more open source projects to our GitHub repo where we have a shake and stir stack that we're trying to work on since that's becoming mandatory soon. But we actually, rather than just focusing on supporting it, and FreeSwitch went for the whole, like generate the certs and everything. And there's a project on GitHub just for that. We also, we wanted to engage the community more and kind of let them be part of maintaining some of the modules as we have so many of them now. So we actually created another repository just for FreeSwitch third-party modules, and have established several people to own, modules they care about. And that way, like rather than waiting for us to look at the patches and stuff, they can kind of just do whatever they want on it and still have it part of the project. And so that was pretty cool because it allows us to kind of give people their own kind of little place to manage stuff, and that's how we always designed it with module systems so that you could, build something that loads on the FreeSwitch, and a lot of times you just what you want to commit. You don't need to ask us for a pull request on something you made anyway. So that's kind of nice, and we've been working on that. And when we did SignalWire, we started working on trying to build open source SDKs to all of the different things that we built. So one of the things that are coming right around the corner here is video APIs, so that you can manipulate, embed that in your own application, but use kind of heavy lifting video without having to maintain infrastructure yourself. And then also, SDKs for various things like putting apps, mobile apps, and web-based apps, and communicating with telecom stuff. And then for those that like using FreeSwitch directly or combining it with the other great open source projects here, we have modules. We have a SignalWire module in FreeSwitch actually that lets you kind of tie it all together, so you can terminate your last mile into your own FreeSwitch machine with anything you build in our cloud as kind of a backup system or a intentional, you can route calls into a FreeSwitch that you put somewhere. So that way you kind of choose your own adventure, whether you want to be like completely hosted infrastructure, or do you want to just have part of it in the cloud and then as a fallback and then route to your own system when you need it. So we're trying to do that and basically to simplify for some of those out there who I've seen many cases of someone that they really like the idea of maybe advanced socket, but they don't want the burden of the FreeSwitch stuff. So like we invented Relay, which is kind of best of both worlds, like an infinitely scalable scripting interface where you still write all your own code and your logic and own it, but you can let us run it for you. So those are kinds of cool things I think that are helping us with our goal to scale things even further. Because we found that, FreeSwitch is really big. It's got a lot of different options in it and very many different things, and everybody wants a different thing. And sometimes we have to make a lot of configuration choices so that those people who have opposing requirements can both be happy. We'll have we'll change something and then like a giant crowd of people are like, hey, you broke it. And the other people are like, thank you, you fixed it. And then like change it back and they're like, hey, wait a minute, you broke it again. So we started having to make all these combinations of configs and making it work from anywhere, which is something that we're really good at, but also it's not the best way to make things simple. So while we continue to do that inside of the FreeSwitch source, we've also happy that we started making some of our cloud functionality in SignalWire, where it's fun to also work on something inside a very specific requirement set, where we don't have to make everything work all the time. So we still leave that to FreeSwitch to be able to handle that. And then we have a lot of cool, interesting things we're doing in SignalWire, where it's kind of fun to make like one specific use case. Even then, like a lot of our cloud stuff has a lot of options still. So that's kind of where we're going with those things.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that, Tony. It turns out that 30 minutes is way too short to talk about all of this. And it sounds like there's a huge amount of stuff still going on. The good news is that the three of you are going to be loitering around, because ClueCon is a great time for people to catch up with the three of you. And so there'll be a chance tonight in the social time, and of course tomorrow morning in the coffee shop at 9 a.m. Central to catch up with everybody. But we have to say goodbye to you for now, because we've got a schedule to keep. Or as they say in the States, you've got a schedule to keep. So thank you very much, Brian. Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you very much, Tony. Really appreciate that. And a great idea, Tony, to get everybody together to have a little chat. Is there anything you'd like to say very briefly before we move on to the next session?
Just keep in touch, everyone. Hang out in Slack and ping us, and we're still here.
Appreciate it. Thank you very, very much, Tony.
Person, but we'll do the best we can on video until we're allowed to have real ClueCon again.
Great, and it's lovely to see all of the little faces here, isn't it? All of the different countries, the different projects, and the different people represented. It's top class. So yeah, thanks a lot, Tony. Great to have you along. And as I said, if people would like to catch up with you to ask questions and speak, then there's plenty of opportunities across the rest of these 2 days. So thanks a lot. We need to wheel in our next participant. Thanks, Tony. And over to Daniel. Daniel, how are you doing, having done an amazing workshop this morning?
Hey, nice seeing you again today. Yeah, it's a good day, I can say. Enjoying the event, looking at the session, or chatting with people on different channels. So it's good to see everyone around here.
Yes, I couldn't help but notice, Daniel, that after your hour-long workshop this morning, you were held back answering questions for a considerable amount of time afterwards. People were wanting to get maximum Daniel, I think.
Yeah, I enjoy discussing with the people. I do also miss, like everyone else, meeting in person, but hopefully with the help of FreeSwitch and other online conferencing system, we can keep in touch during these times.
Absolutely. Now, this morning when you were doing your workshop, you made reference to the session that you're going to deliver now as a kind of a continuation and filling in some gaps. So I'd like to hand over to you now to run your session, and feel free to get your slides up, and off you go. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I plan it a little bit related in the way that with this session, where I approach some aspects where you can use Kamailio for DID or number routing. So the first session in the morning was introducing the Kamailio configuration file and basic operation in the configuration file. And we know that while SIP is somehow designed for any kind of real-time communication sessions, the most used case for it is IP telephony or voice over IP, where most of the services are routing telephony number, phone numbers. For those that haven't been with the previous session, quickly to say that I'm one of the co-founders of Kamailio project, working with it for many years. Let's not spend more, because you can watch the recording of the workshop done a few hours ago. It's already available on YouTube if you want to learn a bit more about myself, as well as about Kamailio. Let's go to DID routing straight, because it's going to be a shorter session this time, no longer 1 hour. So practically, when it's when we talk about DIDs or target numbers in SIP, we refer to the user part of the request URI. So the user part in the SIP address in the first line of the request, what I highlighted here in red. In Kamailio configuration file, you can retrieve the value via $R_U variable, and this is a read-write variable, so you can update it as you need in the configuration file. And practically, when you receive a call, you need to do some operation. In many cases, you can call it like normalization of the telephone number of the DID. It can require operations such as stripping from the beginning of the DID. It can be the case that you get a call in international format, and then you want to translate it to local phone number, like with only area code and telephone numbers. Sometimes you need to strip at the end. At least in Germany, it's quite popular to have a main number and then a subset of it by appending more digits to it. So you may need to translate from a number within your company to the main number. So you need to strip the last 2 digits, so you append a 0 or something like that. And of course, prefixing the numbers, translating the other way around from local number, like the case when your customer dials national format and you need to translate it to international format, because ESTN gateway it's accepting E164 for the numbers. We have in Kamailio different methods for the same kind of operation. Could be with functions, or could be with variables. So stripping, you have the strip function, or you can use a transformation s.strip. You give the number of digits to be removed from the beginning, or strip tail when you want to remove digits or even characters. Could be anything, not only digits, from the end of the user part of the request URI. Then, of course, prefixing could be country code, or could be area code, depending how the number was coming in. And you can concatenate the variable with itself. And of course, depending on the needs, you can combine operations in the same, like putting a prefix, stripping from the end, as well as appending to the end of the number. So it's quite a lot of flexibility in the Kamailio configuration file language in this regard. Besides this classic operation, stripping, like prefix and suffix and adding there, sometimes you may need to do let's say a bit more complex operation, like maybe removing unwanted characters like white spaces, dots, dashes between the numbers, replacing some parts of the number. So we have also here a couple of options that you can use with variables and transformation. There are also some functions I haven't listed here, but you can look at the TextOps module. Subs URI could help to change the user part of request URI using the regular expression substitution. More or less the equivalent of the last statement here, where we assign to the same variable, a local variable num, with a regular expression substitution. So practically we change from 55 to 00 all the occurrences in the number. So these are just, again, some examples how you can transform these input numbers in something that you need for your routing. And in the middle, you have the expression with the transformation, removing the white spaces, then removing the dot, and then removing the dashes. So that's an expression where you can chain a couple of transformations to get what is expected to process further. Of course, doing all this operation in configuration file might not be, let's say, scalable from this point of view. Think about deployments covering a couple of countries, each country with own dial plan with different behavior for subscribers. In some countries, you have to dial always like national number. In countries like Germany, you can also dial local number without any area prefix. And you don't really want to end up in a very large configuration file where you have all these operations for each country. For that case, you can use dial plan module. In this module, practically you can store in the database list of rules for transforming the input value to an output based on regular expression substitution. So, for example, the second row in my example will transform from Berlin number, which starts with 030, into international format in Europe for the fixed telephony, which is leading with 00, then country code 49, and what followed after the 0 in the previous or in the input value. So you can read this rule as we have to match on a number that starts with 030, and then we group all the digits after the leading 0, and we back reference it in the replacement expression. So we put 0040, and this back reference \1, it's practically taking the group from the substitution expression. You can group these rules per dial plan ID. So you can have a dial plan for Germany, one for USA, one for UK with different rules. The rules are applied based on priority. If they have the same priority, it will be applied in the order they loaded from the database. You have to load this dial plan module, set the database URL from where to fetch these rules, some other parameters, and then in your routing block. So after authentication and so on, when you need to decide where to send that traffic, you can use a function exported by the dial plan module, dp replace. The first parameter would be the dial plan ID, then the input value, and the output variable. So we'll take the request URI user part, the incoming ID. We store it in a new variable var new ru, and if it was a transformation, we can update the request URI user part with the result of the dial plan transformation. You can have 100,000 of records in the database. The records are cached in memory, precompiled during the loading, so this is quite fast at runtime. The next kind of processing or need when routing the ID is mapping the numbers. Typically, telephony companies buy a pool of numbers from local, like government authorities and so on, and usually they map those numbers to local users. The local users sometimes have a shorter user ID, could be like PBX extension 101, 102, or could be even alphanumeric username. In between the users, they can call directly using their user ID or the short extension. However, incoming calls need to be mapped over these numbers. And we have a couple of variants in Kamailio. One would be to rely on alias DB module. So practically the alias username will be the full DID. Of course, the format, you'll have to transform it from the incoming number if it's not coming already in this format plus country code and the phone number. I gave the examples how that can be done before. And the username, it's the real user ID of the target subscriber. Here I have the examples with Alice, Bob, Carol. The module also can work in multi-domain, so you can have, let's say, username Alice in a couple of domains, one Kamailio.org, another one could be acipto.com. Of course, this is somehow more specific to PBX systems. So if you have like a hosted cloud PBX system, each PBX can be its own domain, and each can have also 101, 102. And by using the domain part, it doesn't conflict with other PBXs. In the configuration file, before looking up the registration of the target user, you have to translate from the incoming DID, what we have here, alias username, to the target username, and you can use alias DB lookup. Takes one parameter. This is the name of the database table which stores these mapping rules. The parameter can take also variables, so you can partition. If you have a lot of users, you can partition them in different database tables, and you name them in a way that you can pass it as parameter to alias DB lookup. The second example here practically takes the first character of the alias username as an example. Another variant would be to build your own DID mapping table and then use SQL Ops module. With SQL Ops, you can do any kind of SQL query. So in this case, we created a table with 2 columns, DID and username. And in the request route, practically you'll have to use SQL query. The first parameter is connection ID. You have the link to the SQL Ops module where you can understand better how to configure this module, how to set up to connect to the database. So we give a connection ID, which is practically specified via module parameter. The second one would be the SQL query. So we select the username from the DID map, where the DID is matching the incoming request URI username, incoming DID. Obviously, you'll have to do sanity checking over the request URI username to prevent SQL injection attacks. This can be done with other functions that we have in Kamailio. Now we focus on the mapping of DIDs. The result will be stored in the container referred by the third parameter, RA in this case, and then practically we can access the result with DBR variable. We give the container ID, RA, the attribute rows returns the number of rows returned by the SQL query. If we have some result, the first value, because we select only one column, we expect to be also one row at the end, will be put into the request URI user part. And then you can go again to look up location or other type of processing that you want to do in the configuration file before sending out the call. Those 2 variants I presented so far were with the database backend. Without caching, any change to the database will be immediately reflected. However, sometimes because of more performance and vertical scalability, maybe you want to keep some caching, so the lookup it's faster, doesn't hit the backend, doesn't hit the hard drive every time. And here you can use the hash table module. Practically with this module, a content of the database table where you can specify like a key and value columns. It's loaded in memory at startup. If you do changes at the runtime, you can push them to the memory of Kamailio via RPC commands. So you can update these items in memory using RPC commands. And then in the configuration file, you can use $sht, which is the variable referring to the hash table items. You give the name of the hash table, the ID map. Again, this is in memory. And then the key, practically, it's incoming the ID, with the example here where we strip the white space and special dot and the dash characters. And the returning value would be the local extension of the local user ID. If we have a mapping, then this $vn, it's not null, and we push its value into request URI username. So this is with hash table data structure in memory with flexibility of loading from database and keeping in memory. The alternative for caching, it's using M3 module. This is very useful when you deal with numbers only. With the hash tables, you can do also mapping of usernames to another username. Doesn't have to be only digits. Tree indexing, it's practically optimized for telephone numbers, for digit-only keywords. Of course, you can add a few special characters like star or plus. It's why with the empty module, you can specify the character list that can appear in the keyword, or it's referred here as a prefix. But if you put the entire alphabet, it's gonna use a lot of memory and is no longer that optimized. In that case, it's better to use hash tables. The benefit of the tree, it's always, no matter how many records you have, the lookup of the value happens in the number of digits in the phone number. So practically, if like in US, you have 10 digits long numbers, it's ensured that you can find the mapping in 10 steps of comparison. With hash table, it's a different algorithm and can be slightly longer and not as optimized for performance as with the tree. On the other hand, with the tree, you cannot really change them easily in memory. You can change to the database and then trigger a reload, but practically it reloads all the records from the database in a different structure. When it's finished with the loading, we'll swap between the active tree structure and the new one, and then we'll feed all the structure. Practically, that means for a very short time, you need twice memory size for loading this in memory. Otherwise, more or less loading the module in the configuration file, setting the database URL, specifying the variable where to store the value associated with mapping. And in the request route, we have this empty match where we give the name of the tree to be match. The input value, again, the request URI username. And in case of no match, we send a reply. Otherwise, we push it to the request URI. So it becomes the new target user ID or number. Then it's about routing outside. Of course, if it's a local user, will be through the registration and location, user location table. But in many cases, you need to send maybe to PBX system, like a free switch running alongside with Kamailio, or maybe send it to an external provider if you are a DID routing service provider. The variants here, of course, would be list cost routing. If you have to send it to external providers, maybe you have different interconnects, and LCR module, it's one of the first options you should look at. Practically in the database, you keep rules based on logless prefix matching. And then let's say it's matching Germany as a country, and associated with this prefix, you have a list of gateways ordered by priority. And then if the first gateway is not replying, you can try next gateways. Remember the failure route from my workshop earlier today. So the step would be load the gateways based on group ID. You can provide like input the ID. If you don't give the second parameter, practically will take the request URI username. And you can also give a caller identification in case you have rules that match on the caller, like the third parameter to the load gateways. And in failure route, you have to use next gateway to try another destination. We have a couple of other variants. One very simple that keeps per domain. So think about this multi-domain deployments or multi-tenant PBX style of services. So per source domain, you can have a prefix, which again could be like country code or area code, and the target domain. And the domain can be also an IP address. So this is when you have mapping of the numbers to a single target address. And you don't need to do rerouting. Could be useful for Kamailio running alongside with farm of free switches. Variants for list cost routing, we have carrier route module. It has a different database structure, but the concept is somehow similar. You'll have to populate some records to the database. This one actually works also with text files, will be loaded in memory, will build the routing paths, and then based on the incoming DID, you'll get the best gateway as specified in the backend records. And the third variant also for the list cost routing module will be derouting. These three modules more or less overlap, but they have some different features. For example, derouting can also do time of the day matching, so you can have rules valid only on weekdays or during the evening time or weekends. So they differentiate between them, but the purpose again would be more or less list cost routing with the same type of interface to the configuration file, loading the routing rules based on a group ID. And then if the selected gateway is not responding, you can reroute to another one through the failure route. And the last one presenting here, a tiny module for those that are big fans of using routing blocks. Practically, you can keep a mapping between the prefix and the route block name. And based on that, we'll execute a set of actions that you put in the associated route blocks. And here you can do any kind of operation, add headers, move headers, set a prefix to the request URI username, set the outbound proxy address, or update the request URI domain part. So you have the full flexibility of scripting language applied per destination prefix. Of course, the prefix can be a full telephone number. It doesn't have to be only the part of it. It doesn't have a limitation. You can put here the 10-digit telephone number and have a route executed only for that specific US number. So where I had the prefix in slides, you could have also a full telephony number that's like a single match for that route. So that's it. Hopefully I finished just in time. Not sure if it's...
You were pretty much in there, Daniel. We're not going to complain about the 1 minute.
I started 2 minutes later. But...
Yeah, no, you did very well indeed, Daniel. Thank you so much for doing that. Because of the timing, we're going to hold over the questions for some later time. So if you'd like to attend the social gathering or be in the coffee shop tomorrow morning, then people can ask more questions. And also, in fairness to you, you were answering a lot of questions after your workshop today for a good long time. So we're very, very grateful. Thank you for going into more detail. And for all the Kamailio fans out there, Fred Posner is going to be along in about an hour's time from now, telling us what we can outsource from FreeSwitch into Kamailio, where that makes sense. So we'll look forward to that. But for now, Daniel, thank you so much for coming along. We really appreciate everything you do in the wider open source community, as well as all the work in Kamailio land as well. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, David. A real pleasure to be part of the community and this event.